Thanks to all of you for coming. Nearing the end stretch here of our day at DevOps Pro. I am here to talk to you guys today about penetration testing and ChatOps. So how many of you were here this morning at the GitHub presentation? Okay, that's almost everybody in the room. Johannes had introduced the concept of ChatOps as innovated by the company GitHub. I myself also, over the past 3 years, have been extremely inspired by ChatOps, and of course also particularly by the way that GitHub has done things. I first learned about the concept about 3 years ago, actually at the DevOps days in Amsterdam, actually from a presentation from GitHub, from one of their staff members that lives in the Netherlands. And we took that concept and ran with it in some, what I believe is some very new directions. I think first, for you to understand a bit about why ChatOps, it helps to understand a little bit about my company. First of all, as I mentioned in the video, we are a not-for-profit computer security consultancy company. That sounds really strange, and it is. I basically set up Radically Open Security as a non-profit alternative to what I saw as being an extremely sick market, actually, in the Netherlands. Why do I say sick? Because there were a number of ethical concerns that, the hacker community was asking the commercial players about that we felt were not being addressed adequately. And secondly, because a lot of the major market leaders in the security consultancy space do not believe very much in openness and transparency. And of course, being an active member of the hacker community, yes, I am a hacker, we have an awful lot in common, of course, with the open source community. And we believe that, of course, information should be free, knowledge should be free. We should optimize for improving the world, positive impact, all that good stuff. But of course, a lot of consultancy companies operate with the traditional black box model of basically stepping in. We are the experts, stand back, and we will fix everything for you because security is this black magic and it's too hard for you to understand. But, I don't believe that it should be like that. And we make use of chat technology precisely for the reason that it enables us to optimally perform knowledge transfer and to optimize for educating our customers rather than keeping them in the dark to build some kind of what I believe is an unhealthy dependence. So this is part of why I think ChatOps has been particularly helpful for my company. But I think also that, as you will see, a number of the modes of interaction and also the tools that it makes possible are things that also perhaps could benefit your own organizations. And of course, you all do not need to be non-for-profit to benefit from that. So, what is ChatOps? So ChatOps, as already was introduced this morning, is the concept of using chat as sort of the command and control center of your operations. Of course, the way that GitHub does it is much of their development and also their operations, of course, are centralized in these chat rooms. For us, we use it as a kind of command and control center of our entire engagement process, from the very beginning to the very end. So, of course, the kinds of functionality that GitHub does is slightly different to our workflow as a penetration test company. So in general, we have this concept that we have called peek over our shoulder. Okay? So the whole idea with peek over our shoulder is that because we are trying to optimize for knowledge transfer, we want it to actually be like customers are looking over our shoulder physically the entire time. Now, we are a completely online company, 100% remote. Okay, very modern, also quite cost efficient, also very scalable. But anyway, the way that this works for us is then that our chat room is our office. There is no alternative physical office for us. This is not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. Of course, some people like to have an office, but for us and for a lot of people that like working from home or working from coffee houses or working from co-working spaces, it actually is quite a comfortable working arrangement. Now, but the other advantage of this is that all of our conversations that we have are visible in the chat room. Literally 100%. Pretty much, because and what that means is, with the peek over our shoulder, is we actually invite our customers to join us in our chat rooms. So in the course of an engagement, whether it is penetration testing or incident response or any other kind of security engagement, they literally can overhear, they can hear every single word that my penetration testers are saying. We also make use of GitHub's open source chatbot Hubot, and we also have it as such. We don't make use of GitHub. We do make use of GitHub for public things, but for the private-facing things, we make use of Gitlab, which we host ourselves, just because I don't trust our customers' pentest data and vulnerability data to a cloud or a third-party service, because as the t-shirt says, there is no cloud, there's just other people's computers. So basically, we use then the chatbot, and every single time that our penetration testers create some kind of finding, or they have some kind of lead or some kind of scan result. So they check, for example, scan output into GitLab, or they modify an issue that we're using, tracking our progress in the course of a job. Hubot constantly provides updates in the chat room that, this penetration tester just made a modification to this issue at this timestamp. Click here for more information. You click on it, and then it takes the customer to their GitLab page, their repository, where they can then actually see the issue and actually be able to follow all the conversation. So it's actually a way of including the customer in such a way that they are getting continuous updates on the work that you're doing for them. Sometimes people would ask, isn't it annoying having the customer there? To be quite honest, I think mostly it's actually quite helpful having the customer there. The reason why, if you think about it, you come in as a third party. So in our case, we come in as a consultancy company. There is always a learning curve when you're working on other people's systems. Now, the nice thing about having the customer in your chat rooms is it is like having an oracle in your chat room. So if we have questions, for example, what does this code path do? What is this function? Why is it here? Or other things, we just created a file on your file system. Can you please confirm that it was created? Or are you using a strong password here? We want to know if it's worth running the password cracker. These kinds of things, essentially, or even if it's just, hey, can you reboot the server? Having the people from the customer in the channel with you saves so much time. Because oftentimes, as a consultant, when you're working with your customer as a third party, a large part of where it goes wrong is in the communication and feedback loop with your customer. I mean, people were talking earlier today about waiting time, idle time. And of course, one of the killers when you're trying to work with your customer, of course, is, sending an email, then, they're in meetings, then waiting a few hours, to get a response, and stuff just gets slow. The thing is, if they are in the chat room with you, you get responses almost instantly. And what does that mean? That means that you get to deliver, ultimately, work that they like better. Because they have these feedback moments with you constantly, which allows them to provide suggestions, to do course corrections. The other benefit of actually having the customer in the chat room with you is if something goes wrong, they see it coming from a mile away. And one of the main reasons that customers oftentimes are unhappy is because they are surprised by something that goes wrong. So something goes wrong, and then they find out at the very end, that it went wrong. And then of course, it winds up taking the project over time or over budget, trying to fix it. Well, the thing is, if they actually see it going wrong at the second that it's going wrong, then they can actually work with you proactively to fix it. Or if not to fix it, to at least adjust the scope to make it more realistic so you're not going to have these tremendously huge overruns. Thus, because of the transparency, you are eliminating that element of surprise. Now, this, of course, is not something that is only applicable to security companies. I think that any of you here, who have customers, and that hopefully is all of you, if you are delivering software to your customers, if you're delivering services to your customers, think about what it could potentially be like pulling them in so close to you and having that many feedback moments so that they, in a way, are almost no longer like their customers. They're actually almost more like partners. Because both of you essentially are on the same level. And this makes a lot of things with the workflow much better. So, so penetration testing and security-specific ChatOps. I mean, there's a number of different kinds of tools that we use. Of course, companies like GitHub are probably more focused on, development and also managing huge amounts of massively scalable servers. For us, that's a bit less of a priority. Well, I mean, partly because we're also still a somewhat smaller company. We only have 35 staff members, so we're about medium-sized, I would say, at this point in time. But so scalability is not necessarily our goal, but creating basically a unified platform for security testing is. Now, the nice thing about the ChatOps is that, as I mentioned before, it's a kind of command and control center for being able to do security testing. Now, the nice thing about this is you can maintain an entire host of different security tools while at the same time allowing new staff members to come in and also allowing the customers to come in and not having to deal with system administration, and for all of these new folks. Because everything is accessed through the chatbot, you basically have to administer everything on the server. So basically, that all happens centrally. But what that means is that any person, once they, of course, get in through the several layers of authentication, once they have access to that chat room, it means that they can launch, for example, an Nmap scan. Just by typing in Nmap IP address. It's that easy, and you don't have to actually worry then about installing all of these various tools, maintaining all of these various tools, and we can also build particular kinds of automation to make the entire pen test process easier. And this also makes the cost of onboarding employees much smaller because, of course, at that point, you aren't having them maintain specific devices. Really, all they need to be able to use your pen testing and security environment is a browser. And at that point, you can even use mobile devices. I can launch a full range of attacks from my cell phone. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. So, and it means that I can work from anywhere and I can be productive from anywhere, and that opens up a lot of productivity. That also opens up a lot of power. And of course, it does mean, of course, with our chat infrastructure that because so much of it is centralized around the chat, of course, that for us is production. Because of course, if our chat environment falls over, then basically our company falls over. And this is, of course, where DevOps comes in. You actually don't generally have a lot of overlap, I would say, between the security community and the DevOps community, but I consider my company, Radically Open Security, to be a DevOps company. And we have to be, because we are maintaining a quickly growing and increasingly complex production environment. And as such, I mean, we are also, of course, busy improving and constantly refactoring, things that we are using containerization, we are using continuous integration and continuous deployment. We have to, because that is essentially the only way that we can keep up and be able to make this increasingly complex back-end environment also production, reliable, stable, because of course pen testers also need an environment that works, because if it doesn't work, of course, then our entire company falls over. But anyway, so some of the things that we can hook into ChatOps are quite diverse. One example of a suite that we have built is something that we called Pentest. So I'm not sure if you all are familiar with OWASP. The OWASP Top 10, for example. Perhaps some of you may have heard of it. It's one of the largest umbrella organizations for web pen testers globally. So we have open sourced our penetration testing, documentation, and workflow framework, and we also made it an OWASP project that is freely available as open source to basically anybody, including all of you. So what is it? It is our documentation management framework. Of course, you know, every pen testing company in the universe has automated their documentation because pen testers, much like coders, hate writing documentation. And anything that you can do to try and make the reporting process less painful, of course, is greatly appreciated. So we use ourselves an XML-based framework. Some other companies do it differently. Some use Word documents or OpenOffice. We started out that way, and it was horrible and painful. Some people use LaTeX. Also could work, but it's a bit fiddly. We choose to use XML just because we can use XSLT style sheets to make it look really nice, and because most people are actually able to handle XML markup. So anyway, so basically we have instructions in GitHub. So all of our publicly, it's also, by the way, worth mentioning that all of the tools and frameworks that Radically Open Security creates are open sourced and released in GitHub. So this also includes all of our trainings as well. Also all of our contracts. We've also Creative Commons all of them. So also it's a charter of our company, by the way, to release as much stuff as open source as possible. Because again, that's part of our impact for trying to make the world better, you know, through security. But, okay, so pen text, if you are modifying the XML directly, then this is more or less what it would look like. You can see that there's different sections and titles and you know, images that you can add and things like that. If you compile it, then it winds up spitting out a PDF that looks a bit like this. So, and of course this looks quite a bit like, well, every penetration test report that you get from pretty much any penetration testing company. So, of course, because it's open source, you also can add your own logos, you can add your own house style. So should you have a need to do your own internal security testing, feel free to make use of this framework. Just put your own logo there. And again, it's open source, so feel free to benefit from this. So, all right. So we make use of Gitlab, as I mentioned earlier. So this is a well, a screenshot. We also use RocketChat, by the way. So we do not use Slack, again, because Slack is in the cloud, and again, because we do not like other people's computers. But what we do is we have these commands. I have to say this is a little bit of an old slide, but these days what we have is something. So our bot is called ROSBot. So that's what we renamed Hubot as. It's called ROSBot, of course, because we're radically open security. So what we do is we say ROSBot build, and then you know, and then basically it looks at the name of the chat room that it's in. So we have these things internally that we call triads. And that's basically a name, so basically a unique identifier that identifies a chat room. You know, in RocketChat. So RocketChat, by the way, is a open source, self-hosted Slack clone. So if anybody really likes Slack, but just doesn't like not having governance over their own data, I would highly recommend RocketChat to any of you. It's almost as fully functional as Slack, and I have to say that the developers and the maintainers are extremely responsive. We come to them with feature requests. They implement stuff. We've come to them also with a few 0 days. They fix them quite promptly. So, you know, in that sense, I can't highly recommend RocketChat enough. It's absolutely fantastic. So anyway, but so we have these triads, which are basically these IDs that correspond a chat room to a GitLab repository to a item on our Kanboard. So we use the Kanboard software for our project management. Well, we use Kanban, like many of you guys do. So the idea then is that based on the chat room that the report, the ROSBot build command is run in, it then can automatically run the tool chain on the backend server, and then spit out a clickable link that you can then click on, and then it opens the PDF, basically. Nowadays, the PDFs also are password protected, and the password for the PDF is also spit out in the chat room next to the clickable PDF link. And then basically, then you can look at your PDF, and you didn't have to do anything to compile it except for typing a command into your chat room. What's even better is that your customers can also click on that PDF. And again, sharing these intermediate deliverables with them, it costs you nothing extra. It costs you no extra time. It costs you no extra effort. And you can constantly keep the customers updated, just because they're following along with what's going on in the chat room. So this is then an example of Gitlab and what one of our Pentest repositories would look like. And you can see that there's a number of internal directories for things like scan results, findings, non-findings. Usually the way that we do documentation is we document things in GitLab issues, and we actually have a conversion tool that converts from basically from GitLab issues into XML. So that's also a preliminary step that we use in our workflow for making also that easier, so they don't need to start out by editing the XML, but they can actually start out by just using GitLab issues. So there's so many tools that you can then integrate into the chat environment. So one particular tool that we use is, for example, if you are doing vulnerability scanning, oftentimes you begin with the reconnaissance phase. You have active reconnaissance, but you also have passive reconnaissance. So at one point in time, we built a tool for passive reconnaissance where we were correlating information for a particular IP address from Shodan. I'm not sure those of you who are familiar with Shodan, but also with Census, the former scans.io that's run by the ZMap team. So this basically is for being able to trawl, some public sources to try and find vulnerability information about your servers without actually actively sending a packet towards the servers. So we wrote a tool for that. We also open sourced it, so that this is also available on GitHub. But the great thing about this is after we build this tool, we can just integrate it into the command and control center of our chat environment, and it's there. And again, basically all the new testers who want to use it, it's just a chat command away. Now, another nice thing about the chat environment and inviting your customers to join you in it is that we came up with something called red-blue pentesting. Red-blue pentesting. So some of you might be familiar with the concept of capture the flag. So capture the flag basically is the gamification of the hacking process. So what we do with red-blue pentesting is we take either developers, sysadmins, or DevOps engineers from a particular company working on a particular product, on a particular system, basically whatever it is that needs to be tested. It could be on infrastructure. And what we do is we take about a dozen of them, and we split them into two teams. One of them is a red team, and one of them is a blue team. We can also split them up into red teams and red teams. And then what we do is we basically gamify their pen test. So we actually have the customer perform their own pen test on their own product, each team under the guidance of one of our professional pen testers. Now, this is actually really cool because A, they're getting an incredibly thorough pen test out of it, because of course the more brains and eyes that you have, the more problems you're going to find. It's also true that all of these engineers are going to have an intimate knowledge of their own product, more so than our guys actually. So, so what that means is that also, you're going to get a fairly thorough set of findings out of the pen test. But the best part, of course, is that it's also a training exercise. And it's actually not even that expensive of a training exercise, because really the only thing that it cost was the time of two of our pen testers, which is what we typically use in a normal pen test anyway, for whatever the period, the length of time is of the red-blue training exercise. But what it does is it actually takes the coders or DevOps people or whoever out of their traditional activities for that period of time. And they can actually then approach their systems as a hacker. And because it's gamified, they're actually competing against each other. So they're finding problems in their own system, and they are proud of it, because they want to win. So we have actually implemented, for example, a scoreboard app using RawSpot. And you can see in this example, we created this command called good job blue. So if as you can read up here, a point for blue for finding missing input validation and adding that yesterday after 5, blah, blah, blah. So I use the command here, good job blue. RawSpot then says incremented blue to 24 points. They get this motivational image. Yeah, motivational. And then, and then basically, we keep score. So at the end of the game, there's a winner. One of the two teams is the winner. And then, then they're incredibly proud of themselves. Now, the great thing about doing this kind of exercise is that the number one comment that we get during the retrospective when it's over, is from the coders is, and I quote, "I will never look at code the same way again." And that is what it's all about. Now, the only reason why we can do this is because of ChatOps. So there's all kinds of more benefits that we as a pen test company have from ChatOps. You can integrate any number of scanning tools, for example, into the ChatOps environment. So things like Nmap, of course, for port scanning, but also web vulnerability scanners like W3AF. You can also use things to attack databases like SQL maps. You can integrate password cracking tools like Hydra, for example, into the chat. And again, it's this unified interface for all of these tools. What's even better, though, is we actually also implemented some scripts that, for example, if you use the nmap command in the chat, what it can do is it can then take that output, because also nmap is able to export stuff in XML format, and we actually then can snip parts of it out of there and then place that in the correct GitLab repository so that Pentest can then take that and integrate that into the correct place in the report. So this kind of stuff is super cool, and again, it's just like a chat command away. Reconnaissance, so both active and passive reconnaissance. I already mentioned the passive scanning tool, but we also things like Whois or Google. Also, in terms of exploitation, hash cracking. So we have implemented our own rainbow tables. Again, just like every security company. But the great thing is, because these, well, of course, rainbow tables are huge, so they have to live on a backend server with a whole lot of storage. But basically, we do that. It's living in our data center, but the rainbow table is accessible via the chat. So I can basically just say, RawSpot, rainbow tables, MD5, and then put the hash there, and then, some number of seconds it can come back and crack the password for me. Cool. And by the way, did I mention I can do this on my cell phone? So that's really a lot of fun. Another thing that we built and also have open sourced is a spear phishing suite, or actually more generically, I should say, a phishing suite. So the way that this works is we've created a number of ChatOps commands in which we can, for example, create a phishing pretext, assemble a list of targets in GitLab, who we want to send it to, and then to be able to launch then basically these pretexts to the different groups of targets. But the great thing about this is we add basically the security officers from the company, from the customer, into the chat room. And the great thing is our Apache web server that's hosting basically the pretext, it actually is tied into Hubot. So basically, every single time that one of our phishing targets clicks on the phishing mail, basically we get a notification that this email address just clicked on this pretext name at this timestamp. So super cool. I mean, basically the security officers can sit there and watch their own people in their company clicking on this phishing mail in real time. Super entertaining. Also, we've done it also with filling in forms. For example, if we are trying to harvest username and credential pairs. So, and actually 2 weeks ago, no, 3 weeks ago, we just did a phishing test with a particular customer. At one point, somebody from the dev team figured out that it was a phishing mail, and then they started putting all kinds of things into the form. And it was actually really quite entertaining, because at a certain point, we were getting things like, username, nice try assholes, And I think my favorite one was username, woohoo, password, a SQL injection. No, it didn't work. But, I mean, the security officers, of course, were watching along with all of this. And, at a certain point, they're like, man, we're going for lunch, but thanks, that was entertaining. So, and again, this is the kind of thing that really is made possible because of ChatOps. As soon as you have the customers in your chat room and then all of this, is tied in, there's so many different things you can develop. So, I mentioned earlier that I consider us to be very much a DevOps shop. As a security company, we are a DevOps company for sure. So we do a lot of different things using ChatOps. One of the things that we did is we have based our entire project management workflow around ChatOps. So for example, I mentioned before that we use a CAN board, so a Kanban board with the CAN board software. We have hooks in it so that we can actually both view and update the CAN board from the chat. What's even better is we've actually implemented certain things so that we can actually implement we can actually move things on the CAN board as a byproduct of other things. I can explain a little bit more concretely. One example in how we did that is, well, some of you might be familiar with the ship-it squirrel. Raise your hands if you know the ship-it squirrel. Okay, small number. Anyway, so, the ship-it squirrel. So it's just basically kind of silly, actually. You basically just say, in our case, rawspot ship it, and then you see a squirrel. That's it. But, we're all geeks here, and, we like squirrels, and, it's just kind of motivational, because, everybody likes shipping things. So, we use the ship it squirrel, for example, if we ship a Pentest report, or if we ship a quotation. These are the kinds of things, then, as a Pentest company, that we're going to be celebrating. As finishing bits of our workflow. But the nice thing is, we've actually integrated it, so when somebody invokes the ship-it squirrel, it actually takes that CAN board item and it moves it to done. Cool. So basically, in doing something that's actually celebrating, it also accomplishes something useful in, helping our project management team keep track of the status of things. So that's a lot of fun. So another thing that we do is we created a mechanism internally that we call Git notes. And what this is it's actually, for us, kind of a self-built support desk environment. So what we've done is, of course, every company has email correspondence with its customers. So what we've done is we actually have created a system in which we basically have these sort of magic email addresses that correspond to the different customer names, but also the actual project names that we're working on. So if you carbon copy or blind carbon copy this magic email address, then what happens is all of that email correspondence winds up getting, first of all, a copy of it is stored in Gitlab. And the second thing that happens is in the appropriate chat room, Rawspot spits out an announcement that says, you have just received an email from this sender with this subject at this timestamp. Please click here to view it. And in such a way, this is actually really cool, because also, if we're doing, for example, multiple engagements for large customers, which we do sometimes, we can just the security officers don't actually know the communications that we're having with their business units, but they want to be on top of it. So what happens then is that we add the security officers to each of their chat rooms, and then because of this Git notes mechanism, they can actually see all of this email correspondence going on with their business units without us having to actually go to any extra effort. Cool. Again, this is all about streamlining and about efficiency, and this stuff is actually really great. Another thing that we have is Rawspot charge. So, of course, one of the banes of being a consultancy company, of course, is having to, well, keep track of billable hours. Every consultant hates recording their billable hours. Well, we've made it actually really easy. All you have to do is you go Rawspot, charge, the number of hours, and a short description of what you did. That's it. And then it basically gets added to a database, and then ROSBot, after you use ROSBot charge, then basically says, thank you, name of pen tester. You have now used N hours out of the M hours allocated. That is, 75% of the scoped pen test, and then it shows you actually a progress bar, showing you how much time you actually have left in the engagement. And it's not just the pen tester that sees this, but the customer also sees it. And this is nice in so many ways. It's nice partly because it helps the pen testers to stay within scope, because they're constantly aware of how much time they have left, which helps them, of course, to prioritize appropriately. ROSBot also spits out an announcement that when 50% of the time is used up in the engagement, that basically, hey, this is the halfway point of our engagement. It's time for an evaluation. And then at this point, we can basically say to our customer, dear customer, we have now used up half of the time. This is what we've got done. This is the work remaining in our scope. We think we might have underscoped it slightly. Okay, it can happen. But we need you, dear customer, to help us prioritize to make sure that in the second half, we can get all the things done that are most important to you. And the customer likes that because they have control and they can make their own choices and prioritizations. And we like that because it means we don't have scope overruns, which saves us money. So at the end of the day, it's completely win-win. And of course, the customers also like it because they know at every given moment in time what they're spending their money on. Because of course, with consultancy, time is money. So much win. Of course, for all of our infrastructure, we have access control, so we make use of role-based access control because, of course, we don't want our customers launching Nmap on anyone else. So, so of course, we also have policies for all of this. Logging, so we have channels just dedicated to error logging. We also have tools just dedicated to debug logging. And again, it's really great because we don't have to give people root privileges on the server. All they need is access to the right chat room, and then they can debug the stuff that they need to debug. We've created our own help menu that resembles man pages. Just because, of course, there's so many ChatOps commands, at a certain point we need some sort of a little help mechanism to try and keep track of all the different commands. And looking into the future, it's really trendy and buzzwordy, but why not AI chatbots? Oh, seriously. But think about it. Think about if you could use chatbots and combine it with some kind of basic AI to, for example, be able to lead the process of a customer satisfaction survey. Everybody hates satisfaction surveys, especially by email. I throw them out, always, because they're annoying. It's just automated, and it's like, okay, whatever. But the thing is, if we could use a chatbot to actually start asking the questions, the really great thing is if you use ChatOps to do this, if the customer gives a surprising answer, well, guess what? There's humans in the room, and the human can take over the conversation. So you can basically then use the chatbot to instill the discipline of actually gathering the feedback, but then, maintain the human touch by actually doing it in an environment in which people are there. Best of both worlds, win-win. I also want to implement a similar thing also for maintaining, for example, satisfaction of my staff. I also want to know these things, and I need to be disciplined, to ask often enough. And I hope that a chatbot can help us with maintaining this discipline and also storing the answers in an appropriate way. So this is all stuff that we're working on developing. But, of course, anything with AI, this is research. So our company has won a lot of awards, primarily for partly for our workflow and also partly for our business model. So the Dutch Chamber of Commerce has called Radically Open Security the 50th most innovative SME in the Netherlands, first of all, which I'm extremely proud of. We've won several awards for non-profit open source projects that we've done, including something called the NetAid Kit, which was a project with Free Press Unlimited, in which we built a fully open source Wi-Fi Tor and OpenVPN router for about 25 euros for activists and journalists. As a non-profit company, we do basically cost price work for any NGO and small civil society organization, which is awesome because they have serious security threats and almost no budget, so they have almost nowhere to go. We've won a few other entrepreneurship awards, like the Sprout Challenger 50, and also CIO Magazine in the Netherlands actually called me the most innovative IT leader in the Netherlands of this past year. So I'm not saying this because I think that I'm that great, but I'm saying this because I think that it actually validates our ideas. I created not radically open security in a very different way from all the other consultancy companies because I wanted to put pressure on the incumbent players to change. And this to me is a piece of activism. You can tell commercial companies, you're not doing good, you should change. And guess what? They're not going to change. But if you create a non-profit company in that same space and you start stealing their customers, well, guess what? You're hitting them in the wallet, and they're actually going to start getting really nervous. And we're actually starting to have an impact on the security consultancy industry in the Netherlands, and not just in the Netherlands. We're a 4-year-old company. I wouldn't call us a startup anymore, but we're 4 years old. We are already a preferred vendor for Google. We are also a preferred vendor for Mozilla. We're part of the Mozilla Open Source Security Audit Program. And we've also, at this point, worked for the Dutch government, all the way top, all the way at the top, all the way down to the little tiny SMEs, at the bottom. So we are having an impact. My newest project that we're just getting started now is we are actually starting an incubator for nonprofit companies. Again, sounds really odd, but I believe that the concept of a nonprofit company, of using a company as a vehicle for good in the social entrepreneurship form, but then more social than a B Corp, because we are actually completely eliminating the profit motive by giving away 90% of our profits. So we are using, again, I don't have time to explain this fully, but we're using a Dutch concept called a fiscal fundraising institution by making our company a for-profit front end for a non-profit back end, and our non-profit back end is something called the NLNet Foundation, which is a foundation that for the last 15 years has supported open source academic research and basically anything for a better internet. Anyways, I'm out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up. I would be happy to take any questions, and I very much appreciate your time. So thank you very much.